To the galaxy, ancient warfare was a subject of curiosity. To humans, it was memory, written in blood and iron. So when the instructor said, "Recreate ancient armor," one student brought something that had already seen battle. The museum request professor. Velrin stood before the empty display cases in the Galactic Cultural Heritage Institute's newest wing and felt what his species called temporal displacement anxiety. The sensation was unpleasant, a combination of professional embarrassment and existential dread that made his sensory tendrils curl inward protectively. The grand exhibition, titled Warrior Cultures Across the Stars, would open in 30 solar rotations, and every species had contributed their artifacts except one. The human display remained conspicuously empty. Around him, the gallery told stories of violence transformed into history. The Krell had provided a ceremonial war mask from their clan unification era, its surface etched with symbols representing battles fought 3,000 years prior. The Theron contributed an energy lance that had ended their last planetary conflict some 15 centuries ago. Even the peaceful Arathi had managed to locate ancient projectile weapons from their pre-Enlightenment period, carefully preserved in climate-controlled museums on their homeworld, but the humans had sent nothing. Velrin's assistant, a floating luminol named Kores, drifted closer with a soft humming sound that indicated concern. "The human cultural attaché has responded to our latest inquiry." "Finally," Velrin said, his translator converting his relief into standard galactic common. "What did they say?" "Dr. Sarah Chen acknowledges our request and states she has identified an appropriate consultant, someone with extensive knowledge of human warrior culture and access to authentic equipment." Velrin felt his anxiety ease slightly. "Excellent. When can we expect the artifacts?" Dr. Chen indicates the consultant will deliver materials personally within 10 rotations. She emphasized that the items will be genuine rather than replicas. "Even better," Velrin said, moving closer to the empty cases. He had studied human history extensively during their admission to the Galactic Collective. The species had a fascinating, if somewhat disturbing past, filled with remarkable violence that had apparently ceased some 80 years prior, according to their application documents. Their last major conflict had involved nearly the entire planet in a catastrophic war that claimed millions of lives. Since then, humanity had maintained what their records called relative peace. The phrase had seemed perfectly clear at the time. Cores dimmed slightly, a sign of uncertainty. "Professor, there is something unusual in the communication. Dr. Chen mentioned that the consultant recently separated from active service." "Active service in what capacity?" "The translation matrix is unclear. The term appears to be military service, but the timeline doesn't align with human historical data. Perhaps it refers to museum service or historical reenactment organizations." Velrin dismissed the concern with a wave of his appendage. "Humans have complex bureaucratic structures. The terminology is probably related to their cultural preservation agencies." He turned back to the empty cases, already imagining how the human artifacts would look alongside the other species' contributions. "What matters is that we'll finally have authentic human warrior equipment to display. This exhibition will demonstrate how all intelligent species follow the same evolutionary path, from violence to peace." In her office at the Human Cultural Exchange Bureau, Dr. Sarah Chen read through Professor Velrin's original request for the 5th time and felt a familiar tension building behind her eyes. The headache that came from navigating interspecies miscommunication was becoming a regular occurrence. The request was perfectly polite and professionally worded. The Galactic Cultural Heritage Institute wanted to borrow artifacts representing human warrior culture from what they termed humanity's ancient violent period. They had specified interest in armor, weapons, and field equipment that would help other species understand Earth's martial heritage. The problem was their timeline. Sarah pulled up the exhibition guidelines again. Each species was contributing materials from conflicts that had concluded at least 500 years prior by galactic standard measurements. The Krell pieces dated back 3 millennia. The Theron artifacts were over 1,000 years old. Even the most recent contributions from other species represented warfare that had ended before humans had developed written language, and the Institute had classified humanity's last major conflict as ancient history because it had ended 80 years ago. Sarah understood the confusion. By galactic standards, 80 years was barely a moment. Most species who joined the collective had achieved post-violent status centuries or even millennia before application. They viewed warfare as a developmental phase that intelligent species naturally evolved beyond, like childhood diseases or primitive superstitions. Humanity's application had been carefully worded to meet collective standards. Last major conflict concluded 80-plus years prior. Current casualty rates within acceptable parameters for post-violent civilization. Both statements were technically accurate. They just didn't mean what the aliens thought they meant. The Galactic Collective had interpreted this as evidence that humanity had transcended warfare. They believed humans had achieved the same peaceful enlightenment that characterized all member species. They thought Earth's warriors were historical figures, as distant and irrelevant as medieval knights or ancient Roman legionaries. They had no idea that humanity still maintained active military forces across the planet, that conflicts still erupted regularly in various regions, that the term acceptable casualty rates was comparative to previous wars, not an indication that casualties had ceased entirely. Sarah could correct this misunderstanding. She could explain that human warfare hadn't ended. It had simply evolved into something more controlled and localized. She could clarify that what humans called peace was actually a state of managed, limited conflict punctuated by periods of active warfare that were small only by comparison to the catastrophic world wars of the past. But something stopped her. The galaxy needed to understand humanity correctly, not through comforting misinterpretations, and perhaps this exhibition was the perfect opportunity for that education, not through lengthy explanations or diplomatic white papers, but through direct demonstration. Sarah opened her contact list and found the name she needed. Marcus Webb, recently retired Marine Corps Master Sergeant, currently working as a military history consultant. She had met Marcus at a cultural exchange seminar, where he had given a presentation on military traditions, with the same calm professionalism that apparently characterized all his work. She drafted a carefully worded message explaining the exhibition and the Institute's request for authentic warrior equipment. She emphasized that Professor Velron wanted genuine articles rather than replicas, items that could convey the reality of human martial culture. She deliberately avoided specifying time periods or clarifying the aliens' assumptions about when human warfare had ended. Marcus's response came back within an hour, brief and direct in the way military communications tended to be. Dr. Chen, I can provide authentic field equipment from my personal service. No need for museum loans or replica manufacturing. I maintained all my gear according to regulations. It's in excellent condition despite field use. Can deliver personally to the Institute for proper setup and explanation. When do you need it? Sarah stared at the message and felt a smile forming despite her better judgment. Marcus had completely misunderstood the assignment, which was absolutely perfect. He thought they wanted actual military equipment from active service, the kind of gear currently used by Earth's armed forces. He had no idea the aliens expected ancient relics from humanity's supposedly distant violent past. She typed her response with deliberate care. Marcus, that would be perfect. Professor Velron specifically wants authentic equipment with genuine use history. The more real, the better. Can you be at the Galactic Cultural Heritage Institute in 10 days? His reply was immediate, affirmative. We'll bring full loadout with documentation. Happy to demonstrate proper usage and maintenance if helpful. Sarah closed her communication terminal and allowed herself a moment of anticipation mixed with slight guilt. She was absolutely setting up a cross-cultural incident. Professor Velron was about to learn that human warrior culture wasn't safely confined to ancient history. Marcus was about to give aliens a comprehensive education in contemporary, human military capability without realizing he was doing it. And the galaxy was about to discover that humanity's definition of peace was very different from everyone else's. The exhibition was going to be far more educational than Professor Velron had planned. Part 2. The demonstration. Marcus Webb arrived at the Galactic Cultural Heritage Institute precisely on schedule, which was how he arrived everywhere. Punctuality had been drilled into him over 20 years of service, and retirement hadn't changed that. He walked through the massive entrance carrying 2 large deployment bags over his shoulders and wearing his full tactical loadout. The armor plates shifted comfortably with his movement, the weight distributed exactly as it should be across his frame. He had spent the previous evening carefully preparing each piece of equipment. Everything was clean but not sanitized, functional but showing honest wear. The gear told a story, and Marcus believed in honest stories. The security checkpoint gave him curious looks. The guards were Vrin, a species with compound eyes that could process multiple visual spectrums simultaneously. They studied his armor with obvious interest before waving him through after confirming his credentials. Marcus made his way through the Institute's corridors, passing displays of artifacts from dozens of civilizations. He recognized some of the weapons from his military history studies. Ancient pulse rifles from the Krell Wars, ceremonial blades from the Theron unification period. Everything was beautifully preserved behind protective barriers and carefully lit to emphasize historical significance. He found the exhibition hall and pushed through the doors. Professor Velron stood near a series of empty display cases, his sensory tendrils animated as he spoke with several other beings. They all turned when Marcus entered. The room went absolutely silent. Marcus smiled professionally and approached with his hand extended in the human gesture of greeting. Professor Velron, Marcus Webb, Dr. Chen sent me regarding the warrior culture exhibition. Velron's tendrils froze mid-motion. His translator emitted a sound that might have been words but came out as confused static. He recovered after a moment and extended his own appendage to complete the greeting gesture, though his movement seemed uncertain. Mr. Webb, we were expecting artifacts for display, not a personal visit in full equipment. Marcus glanced down at his gear and then back at the professor with slight confusion. Dr. Chen said you wanted authentic materials with genuine use history. I figured it made sense to bring my personal loadout and demonstrate proper configuration. Easier than trying to explain everything through documentation. He set down his deployment bags and began unpacking with practiced efficiency. I brought my standard combat kit plus some specialized equipment for context. Everything here has seen actual field use, so you'll get real wear patterns and authentic damage indicators, rather than pristine replicas. Kors, the luminal assistant, floated closer with cautious interest. When you say field use, you mean historical reenactment or simulation exercises? No, actual deployment rotations, Marcus replied easily, pulling out his plate carrier. This is my primary vest. Carried it through 2 tours in active theaters. He turned it to show the aliens. See this scoring on the ceramic plate? That's from a rifle round that hit center mass. Plate caught it perfectly. Did exactly what it was designed to do. The alien stared at the damaged armor plate with expressions Marcus couldn't quite interpret. He continued his demonstration, warming to the subject. The nice thing about modern body armor is the layered protection system. You've got soft armor for fragmentation and handgun rounds, then hard plates for rifle threats. This particular plate is rated for multiple impacts, though you replace them after they take hits because the structural integrity degrades. He tapped the spiderweb cracks radiating from the impact point. This one's retired from service but perfect for educational display. Velron found his voice, though it emerged higher than normal through the translator. How recently was this equipment in active use? I separated from service 6 months ago, so this gear was operational until then. Its current generation equipment may be one iteration behind what's being issued now, but the fundamentals haven't changed much. Marcus set the plate carrier aside and pulled out his helmet. Now this piece has some interesting history. The helmet bore obvious damage. Scorch marks streaked one side and a visible dent marred the crown. Marcus held it up like a teacher presenting a visual aid. This dent happened during a controlled demolition that went slightly wrong. Building came down while we were closer than planned. Helmet took the impact from falling debris and kept me conscious. Hurt like hell, but no concussion, no fracture. Modern materials and good engineering. He pointed to the scorch marks. These are from a thermite reaction. We were breaching a reinforced position and caught some blowback. Again, helmet did its job. One of the other aliens, a Theron with iridescent scales, spoke up with barely controlled alarm. You personally experienced these events? These are not artifacts from your ancestors? Marcus looked genuinely confused by the question. My ancestors? No, this is my gear from my service time. Why would I bring someone else's equipment? He paused, then understanding seemed to dawn. Oh, did you want older generation stuff? I can get that too. My father kept his gear from the Vietnam era, and my grandfather saved some pieces from World War II. That's genuine historical material if you want artifacts from the really old conflicts. The silence that followed was profound. Velryn's tendrils had gone completely still, which Marcus would later learn was a sign of deep shock in his species. Marcus, interpreting the silence as interest, continued his presentation. He laid out each piece of equipment methodically: the tactical belt with magazine pouches, the field medical kit, the communication equipment, the hydration system. Each item was explained with casual professionalism, describing its function and recounting instances of its use. This medical pouch carries combat lifesaver supplies. Tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, pressure dressings, chest seals. Every squad member carries one because immediate trauma care determines survival rates. He pulled out a tourniquet, the fabric stained despite cleaning. These stains are from actual applications. Field medicine gets messy, especially under fire, but you train until the procedures become automatic. A small crowd had gathered now, other curators and visiting scholars drawn by the commotion. They watched Marcus with a mixture of fascination and something that looked like horror. Marcus pulled out his field manual, the pages worn soft from use and marked with handwritten notes. I brought this for context. Shows how everything integrates into tactical doctrine. See, here's the load planning section. And these margin notes are adaptations based on field experience. The manual gives you baseline procedures, but you modify based on actual conditions. You modified official procedures? One of the archivists asked, the translator conveying something like scandalized shock. Of course, doctrine is a starting point, not a rigid script. You adapt to circumstances. That's what separates experienced personnel from new recruits, knowing when and how to deviate from the book. Marcus spoke as if this was self-evident. Combat is fluid. You need people who can think and adapt, not just follow instructions. Velryn finally managed to form a coherent question. Mr. Webb, when you say combat, you mean actual organized violence between armed groups? Yes, that's the standard definition. Marcus looked concerned now, wondering if the translator was malfunctioning. Armed conflict between military forces or insurgent groups. Combat operations. And you participated in such conflicts personally. That was my job. Infantry specialist, later a squad leader. Deployed to active theaters multiple times over 20 years. Marcus gestured to his gear. This equipment kept me alive during those deployments. That's why I maintained it so carefully even after separation. Separation from what? From active service. I'm retired now, though technically I'm in the reserve system so I could be recalled if needed. Probably won't happen, but you maintain readiness just in case. He said this as casually as someone might discuss keeping a spare tire in their vehicle. Cores dimmed to barely visible levels. You could be recalled to participate in combat again? Sure, that's what reserve status means. You're not actively serving, but you stay current on training and certification. Most of us won't get called back unless something major happens. But the system exists for a reason. Professor Velryn's chromatophores, which Marcus hadn't even known he possessed, began cycling through rapid color changes. When did humanity cease engaging in organized warfare? Marcus laughed, genuinely amused. Cease? We haven't ceased. Things are relatively quiet right now compared to some periods, but conflicts happen constantly. That's just reality. Someone has to be ready to respond, and that's what military forces do. But your species joined the collective as a post-violent civilization, Cores said, the words emerging as almost a plea. Your application stated that major warfare had ended. Understanding finally dawned on Marcus's face. Oh, major warfare. Right, we haven't had one of those in a while. The last really big one ended in 1945 by our calendar, about 80 years ago. But smaller conflicts, regional disputes, counterinsurgency operations, peacekeeping missions, that's ongoing. That's not the same scale at all. How do you define major warfare? Velryn asked with growing dread. Marcus considered the question seriously. World wars involved multiple continents, dozens of nations, industrial-scale combat resulting in tens of millions of casualties. Total warfare mobilizing entire populations. We haven't had anything like that since the mid-20th century. Modern conflicts are much more limited in scope. Usually regional, specific objectives, professional military forces rather than mass conscription. Casualties in the thousands or tens of thousands rather than millions. Thousands of casualties, one of the archivists repeated faintly. Right. Tragic, but not catastrophic on a species level. We've gotten much better at limiting conflict scope and reducing civilian casualties. Precision weapons, better intelligence, professional forces with strict rules of engagement. Modern warfare is actually relatively controlled compared to historical standards. Marcus noticed the reactions around him finally. The stunned expressions, the shocked stillness, the way several aliens had physically retreated from his equipment display. He frowned with concern. Is something wrong? Did I misunderstand what you needed? Velrin struggled to find words. Mr. Webb, we believed human warrior culture was historical, ancient, safely distant from your contemporary society. Why would you think that? Because every other species in the collective evolved beyond warfare centuries or millennia ago. We assumed humanity had followed the same pattern. Marcus processed this slowly. You thought we stopped fighting? Yes, but we haven't. We understand that now. A long silence stretched between them. Marcus looked at his carefully arranged equipment, then back at the assembled aliens. So when you asked for ancient warrior artifacts, you expected museum pieces from conflicts that ended hundreds of years ago? Yes. And instead I brought my personal gear from 6 months ago? Yes. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of mild embarrassment. That's awkward. I can get older stuff if you want. Like I said, my grandfather kept World War II equipment. That's 80 years old. Definitely historical by human standards. Mr. Webb, Velrin said carefully. 80 years is not historical by galactic standards. That is contemporary. Recent. Practically yesterday. The full scope of the misunderstanding finally landed. Marcus stood surrounded by his combat gear, representing capabilities that made him an active warrior by galactic definitions, in a museum meant to display safely extinct martial traditions. So the other species here, Marcus gestured at the surrounding displays. They haven't had wars in hundreds or thousands of years? Correct. And you thought humans were the same? Yes. But we're not. Clearly not. Marcus looked at his equipment again, seeing it through new eyes. Not as historical artifacts, but as evidence of ongoing human capacity for organized violence. Evidence that humanity was fundamentally different from every other species in the collective. Do you still want this for your exhibition? He asked quietly. Professor Velrin looked at the gear, at Marcus, at the growing crowd of shocked observers. His sensory tendrils moved in complex patterns that might have represented a dozen different emotions. Yes, he said finally. But perhaps we need to reconsider what story we're telling. The understanding, the emergency board meeting convened in the Institute's primary conference chamber within hours of Marcus's demonstration. Professor Velrin sat at the head of the curved table, surrounded by the exhibition's senior curators, cultural advisors, and several hastily summoned representatives from the Galactic Collective's Interspecies Relations Committee. The holographic display in the center of the room showed images of Marcus's equipment, each piece documented and analyzed. Dr. Sarah Chen had arrived 30 minutes earlier, summoned by an urgent message that managed to convey panic through pure diplomatic formality. She sat quietly now, watching the aliens process what they had learned. Director Kethis, a senior Theran official, spoke first. His scales shifted through agitated color patterns. This is a significant problem. We admitted a species to the collective under false pretenses. They are not post-violent. They are actively, currently, professionally violent. The application materials were technically accurate, Sarah said calmly. Humanity's last major conflict did end over 80 years ago. Our casualty rates are within acceptable parameters compared to historical baselines. Acceptable parameters, Kethis repeated with something like disbelief. Mr. Webb casually mentioned thousands of casualties in recent conflicts. Thousands. Most collective species haven't experienced a single violent death in centuries, and that's a difference in scale and context, not a fundamental misrepresentation. Sarah pulled up her own data display. Human warfare has evolved substantially. We've reduced the scope, limited the participants, established international conventions governing conduct. What we call war now would have been considered a minor skirmish by our ancestors' standards. Velrin's tendrils twisted with confusion. But it's still war. Still organized killing. Still active violence. Yes, Sarah acknowledged simply. We never claimed otherwise. You assumed post-violent meant the complete absence of conflict. For humans, it means the absence of existential civilization-threatening warfare. It means violence is the exception rather than the norm, deployed selectively rather than universally. Cores floated near the holographic display, examining an image of Marcus's damaged helmet. The human treats combat equipment the way we treat communication devices. Casual familiarity, professional competence, no emotional weight. Because for him, it is professional equipment, Sarah explained. Marcus spent 20 years in military service. That's his career, his expertise, his contribution to society. He's not a warrior in the ancient sense of someone defined entirely by violence. He's a soldier, which is different. A professional who specializes in the application and management of force. How can violence be a profession? Asked Mireth, one of the Arathi cultural advisors. Her species had been entirely pacifist for over 2 millennia. How can intelligent beings treat killing as a career path? Sarah considered her response carefully. Because humans recognize something about ourselves early in our development. We're capable of tremendous violence, but we're also capable of controlling and directing that violence. Rather than pretending we could eliminate our capacity for aggression, we developed systems to channel it productively. Military service became a profession like medicine or engineering. Specialized knowledge applied to specific problems. But the problem is violence itself, Mireth protested. The solution isn't more skilled violence. It's the elimination of conditions that create violence. That's one approach, Sarah agreed. It's worked well for your species. But humanity developed differently. We decided that since conflict was inevitable, someone needed to be skilled at managing it. Someone needed to be ready to respond when diplomacy failed. Someone needed to maintain the capacity for defense. The room fell silent as the implications settled. Kethis broke it with a direct question. Are we safe? Should the collective be concerned about human aggression? Sarah met his gaze steadily. You're safer with humanity as a member than you would be otherwise. Yes, we maintain military capability. Yes, we still engage in conflicts. But we also have strict cultural controls on when and how force is used. Humans don't fight because we enjoy it. We fight when we judge it necessary. And we've developed sophisticated frameworks for making those judgments. Sophisticated frameworks, Velrin repeated. Mr. Webb spoke about modifying official procedures based on field experience. About adapting doctrine to circumstances. That sounds like improvised violence, not controlled application. It's both, Sarah said. Tactical flexibility within strategic constraints. Marcus operates inside a system of laws, regulations, rules of engagement, and international conventions. But within those boundaries, he needs the freedom to respond to dynamic situations. That's what training provides. The judgment to know when the rules apply strictly and when adaptation is necessary. The door to the conference chamber opened, and Marcus entered, looking uncomfortable in civilian clothes. Sarah had suggested he leave his gear in the exhibition hall, and he had complied, though he moved with the same unconscious confidence even without the equipment. Sorry I'm late, he said, taking an empty seat. Security needed to verify my credentials 3 times. Mr. Webb, Kethis addressed him directly. We need to understand something fundamental about human culture. When you engage in combat, what prevents you from excessive violence? What stops the killing once it begins? Marcus looked surprised by the question. Training, discipline, rules of engagement, command structure, legal accountability, personal ethics, the Geneva Conventions, international law, cultural expectations, professional standards. He ticked off items as if listing equipment. There are layers of controls. Multiple systems ensuring force is applied appropriately. But in the moment, during actual combat, who enforces these controls? I do, every soldier does. That's the point of professional military culture. You internalize the standards until they become automatic. You don't need external enforcement in the moment because the training has become part of how you think. Mireth leaned forward. But you modify procedures. You adapt. Doesn't that mean you're making independent decisions about when violence is justified? Within parameters, yes. That's what tactical judgment means. But those parameters are defined by policy and law and ethics. I have flexibility in how I accomplish objectives, not in what objectives are acceptable. Marcus paused, searching for the right words. Think of it like medicine. A doctor has training and protocols, but they also need judgment to adapt treatment to specific patients. That doesn't mean they're inventing medicine randomly. It means they're applying professional expertise to unique circumstances. Except medicine heals, Kors said quietly. Combat kills. Sometimes, Marcus agreed. But the purpose isn't killing. It's achieving objectives that protect people or prevent greater harm. Killing might be necessary for that, but it's not the goal. The goal is resolving the situation with minimum necessary force. Velrin's tendrils moved in patterns Sarah was beginning to recognize as analytical consideration. You're saying human warfare is fundamentally defensive? Protective? Most of the time, yes. There are exceptions. Humans aren't perfect. We fought aggressive wars, engaged in imperialism, committed atrocities. But contemporary military doctrine in most nations emphasizes defensive operations, peacekeeping, and humanitarian intervention. We maintain capability because threats exist, not because we want to create threats. What threats? Kethis asked. Humanity is unified enough to join the collective. Who are you defending against? Marcus glanced at Sarah, who nodded permission to speak freely. Against ourselves, partially. Different nations, different factions, different ideologies. We're unified in the sense of having planetary governance frameworks, but we're not a single government. Conflicts still arise from competing interests. And then there are non-state actors, terrorist organizations, criminal cartels, insurgent groups. Threats don't require nation-state structures. The aliens absorbed this with visible discomfort. Their own species had achieved complete internal unity before developing space travel. The concept of ongoing internal human conflicts was genuinely alien to them. There's something else you need to understand, Sarah added. Military service is respected in human culture. Veterans like Marcus are honored for their sacrifice and expertise. We don't view soldiers as necessary evils or remnants of a primitive past. They're valued members of society who perform difficult, dangerous work that most people can't or won't do. You honor violence? Mareth asked, confusion evident. We honor service and sacrifice, Marcus corrected gently. We honor the willingness to face danger on behalf of others. The violence is regretted, but the dedication and courage are respected. A long silence followed. Finally, Director Kethis spoke with careful deliberation. We need to decide how to present this in the exhibition. We cannot hide what we've learned. Other species will need to understand what humanity represents within the collective. Velrin's tendrils straightened with decision. We display everything exactly as Mr. Webb provided it. His equipment, his explanations, his perspective. But we add context explaining that this represents current human military culture, not historical artifacts. That will cause concern, Kors warned. Other species will question why humanity was admitted. Some may demand reassessment of membership status. Let them question, Velrin said firmly. The alternative is deception, and that serves no one. Better to confront uncomfortable truths than perpetuate comforting lies. Sarah felt tension she hadn't realized she was carrying begin to ease. Professor, thank you. That's exactly the right approach. We'll need additional materials, Velrin continued, his mind already working through details. Historical progression showing how human warfare evolved. Comparisons between different eras. Information about control systems and international law. Mr. Webb, would you be willing to provide more comprehensive documentation? Absolutely, Marcus replied. I can put together a complete overview of modern military structure, equipment, doctrine, everything you need for educational context. And perhaps, Velrin added thoughtfully, a personal perspective. Not just technical information, but your own experience. Why you chose military service. What it meant to you. How you reconcile professional violence with personal ethics. Marcus looked uncomfortable for the first time. That's more personal than I usually discuss. It's also essential for understanding, Sarah said gently. The galaxy needs to see that human soldiers are thinking, feeling, ethical people who've made difficult choices, not mindless warriors or violent aberrations. After a long pause, Marcus nodded. All right, I'll try. The meeting continued for another hour, working through logistics and planning additional exhibition components. By the time it concluded, a new vision had emerged. The human display would be the centerpiece of the exhibition, not as a curiosity from the past, but as a window into a species that had taken a fundamentally different path to civilization. As people filed out, Marcus approached Sarah with a rueful expression. I really screwed this up, didn't I? I was supposed to bring ancient artifacts and instead caused an interspecies incident. Sarah smiled. You did exactly what needed to happen. The galaxy was going to learn the truth about humanity eventually. Better to confront it directly than let misconceptions fester. Still feels like I walked into a cultural minefield. Welcome to diplomatic service, Sarah said with gentle amusement. This is actually fairly typical. We spend half our time managing revelations about things we assumed everyone understood. They walked together toward the exhibition hall, where Marcus's equipment remained carefully arranged. In the 30 rotations since his demonstration, the pieces had taken on new meaning. No longer just functional tools, they had become symbols of human difference, evidence of a species that had mastered violence without transcending it. The exhibition opened to unprecedented attention. Visitors from across the collective came to see the human display, drawn by rumors of the warrior species that had joined their peaceful alliance. They stood before Marcus's armor and weapons, reading the detailed explanations he had provided, studying the damage patterns and wear marks that told stories of survival and purpose. Marcus gave tours regularly, patiently answering questions that ranged from technical specifications to philosophical inquiries about the nature of violence. He spoke with the same calm professionalism he had shown from the beginning, never glorifying combat but never apologizing for it either. He simply explained, clearly and honestly, what it meant to be a human soldier. Professor Velrin watched from the gallery entrance as Marcus demonstrated load-bearing equipment to a group of young Krell students. Their carapaces gleamed with patterns indicating fascination and slight fear, but they listened intently, asking questions with genuine curiosity. "He's become our most popular educator," Kors observed, floating beside the professor. "Visitor numbers have increased 400% since the human display opened. Because he represents something most species thought was extinct," Velrin said. "A living connection to warrior culture, not historical recreation, but contemporary reality. Does it concern you that humans are so different from everyone else?" Velrin's tendrils moved in thoughtful patterns. "Initially, yes. Now I'm not sure. Perhaps the collective needs a species that hasn't forgotten how to fight. Perhaps there's wisdom in maintaining that capability, even while hoping never to use it. Or perhaps," Kors suggested, "we've learned that post-violent doesn't mean the same thing to everyone. That humanity's path is simply different, not wrong." In the center of the gallery, Marcus finished his demonstration and smiled at the students' enthusiastic responses. He had come to the Institute expecting to drop off some old gear and maybe give a brief presentation. Instead, he had become a bridge between human culture and galactic understanding, teaching lessons about violence and peace that nobody had anticipated. Sarah joined Velrin at the gallery entrance, watching Marcus work. "Thank you for giving him this platform," she said quietly, "and for being willing to understand rather than just judge." "Thank you for trusting us with the truth," Velrin replied, even when that truth was uncomfortable. The exhibition, Warrior Cultures Across the Stars, became the most visited in the Institute's history. But more importantly, it became the foundation for genuine understanding between humanity and the collective. Other species learned that humans viewed warfare as a managed reality rather than an eliminated possibility. They learned about military professionalism, ethical frameworks for violence, and the complex cultural systems that allowed humans to maintain deadly capability while building peaceful civilization. And humanity learned something equally important, that their relationship with violence, which they had always seen as a regrettable necessity, was actually extraordinary, that most intelligent species really did evolve beyond warfare entirely, that humanity's ability to balance peace and preparedness, civilization and combat capability, was unique in the known galaxy. Marcus Webb returned to his consulting work with a new understanding of his place in the universe. His equipment remained on display at the Institute, no longer just functional tools but artifacts representing humanity's distinctive path through the stars. And whenever visitors asked why humans maintained such capability, the answer was always the same. Because someone has to be ready, someone has to know how, and for humanity, that someone was a choice, not a curse. The exhibition taught the galaxy that post-violent civilization could take different forms, that humanity's way was neither superior nor inferior, simply different, and that understanding difference was the foundation of genuine peace, more valuable than any weapon, more powerful than any army. Marcus stood in Gallery 17 one final evening, alone with his equipment after the crowds had gone. He touched the scarred armor plate gently, remembering the impact that had marked it, remembering the squad mates who had been there, remembering why he had chosen this life. "Still doing your job," he said quietly to the gear. Just teaching now instead of protecting. That's better, isn't it? The equipment, of course, didn't answer. But in the stillness of the gallery, surrounded by artifacts of violence from 100 civilizations, Marcus felt something like peace. Not the absence of conflict, but the presence of understanding. And that, he thought, was what humanity had always been fighting for.